So hang out here, I'll turn the lights up when you've done your intro, and then I'll keep an eye on it.
Why don't we get started, folks, because we are live streaming this, and so there are hopefully some viewers in Prince George and Smithers and elsewhere that we've alerted to this, or who wanted to have the connection. I hope they didn't give up just because it wasn't on at exactly 12.
Snowed in, I think there was a snowed in.
So I think Chris will blame the low attendance on the weather.
Sure.
But if you're willing to go ahead with the presentation anyway, I think the live stream recording is going to be a great asset in having it archived and available for people.
Yeah, great.
So for those of you in attendance who don't know Chris, or those of you out watching this from foreign destinations, I asked Chris for a little bit of background about himself. He's from Prince George, did his undergraduate and master's degrees in social work at the UNBC, so we have a proud alumnus here with us today. And in terms of what brings him both to this topic and this location here in the Northwest region, Chris tells me that he in fact builds his life and plans his life around rivers. So the Skeena Watershed, as being one of the last wild undammed rivers of the west coast of North America, with its vibrant cultural and ecological setting, is certainly a good place for him to be based. So today Chris is going to speak to us about some experience on the rivers, particularly his work with engaging youth in environmental issues, with the journeys on the river being, in fact, a metaphor for their life's journey, as I believe he'll tell us. Chris.
Thanks very much, Phil. Okay, well, it looks like I'm going to have to try and keep the audience calmed down. They're pretty riled up here.
So I think you have to stand between the podium and the screen.
You know what? I actually I'm glad to be here, but I'm not going. I asked the tech to set it up just on the screen, because I'm going to be walking around.
You're going to walk around.
I'm not going to be in the.
No, you don't want to be in the camera. Okay.
No, I won't.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here on Tsimshian territory, and the reason I'm thrilled to be here is because not only do I get to talk to you about something I'm really passionate about, which is youth care work and rivers, but also I'm thrilled because we get to talk about our values and how we plan to project our values into the future. And this talk today is going to be around a youth program that I developed in 2008 called YOW, and that's Youth on Water. So throughout this talk, I'm just going to briefly cover what I'll be telling you in the next 25 minutes or so. We're going to talk a bit about the Skeena Watershed. We're going to talk about our shared values. I'll tell you a bit about who I am, my story. I'll talk to you about some of the research that I've done, and then how that research became YOW and became another program called WOW, which is Women on Water. And then I'll talk about the future of our watershed. So I'm sure you know that the Skeena Watershed and the Sacred Headwaters, which is here in this photo, is home to some of the most spectacularly abundant populations of caribou, moose, deer, grizzly bear, not to mention the spectacular number of salmon that call the Skeena River home. So we have we have 5 unique salmon species that use the Skeena Watershed to reproduce, and unfortunately, what we find are some of these species are at risk right now, as you probably know. So what I thought I would do is ask you to keep in mind some of the risks associated with industrial activity in our watershed. So here's another photo taken by a friend of mine. Hi, thanks for coming. Another photo taken by a friend of mine. This is also in the Sacred Headwaters. So this is at the very start of the Skeena River, where the Skeena River is no wider than this room, and not even as deep as your knees. So you could wade across it at the very top of it. Within, a day's long walk, you can reach the the headwaters of the Nass River. You can also reach the headwaters of the Skeena River. This is just an amazingly diverse place. And actually, one of the National Geographic Explorer in Residence, Wade Davis, called it the Serengeti of North America. So why did he call it the Serengeti of North America? Because of the abundance of wildlife. We have an incredibly rare feature here. This is one of the last intact wild salmon ecosystems left in the world. And I don't mean our world as in BC. I mean the entire globe. This is it. So, you know, a picture like this, although it's a bit innocuous, it's just a fuel barrel, but this is a tipped over fuel barrel. Somebody just left. This is the sacred headwaters. This is where the start of these, this is the start of the Skeena, the Nass and the Skeena, right here where this barrel's tipped over. So we're looking at a number of threats. What I'd like you to do is maybe just turn to the person next to you and just talk about some of the things you value about life here in Terrace or in this region. I'll just give you 2 minutes. Just share a couple of your values with me.
I think maybe we can do it just as a group.
Sure, great. Well, what do you have?
Group work.
Yeah.
You know, I love to be able to grow healthy food in clean soils in this region. So we have such a great growing season.
To have space and as many animals as you can pack into that space.
Nice.
That's for me.
Nice.
For me, it's just the fact that we can look out and see wild landscapes, not under the influence and supposed control of mankind. We let nature develop and evolve and go through its natural processes like it had been for millions of years.
Well, I just came in from Prince George,
Yeah.
and I love it there, but I mean, the hand of industrialization is everywhere there. And so I think what appeals to me about this region, when I get the chance to come up here,
Yeah.
is that that's not as present, that you do get more of a sense of intact ecosystems.
Absolutely. And I'll be talking a bit about Prince George, given that I grew up there. So these values that we hold, these things that we find important about where we live, how do we project those values into the future? How do we make sure that in 20, 30, 40 years, that these values that we hold dear are still pertinent values in society? Yeah.
But there are so many people here sitting that
Yes.
I don't see. Their value is make as much of a fast buck as I can by cutting down, digging up, polluting if necessary. That's their values as well.
Did we work this out before?
No, great minds think alike.
I think so. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there are people in our community whose values are not the same as the ones that we've just discussed, or that, you know, they're just a little bit different. And that's the interesting thing about values is, I mean, who's to say that one value is right and one value is wrong? That's what values are. They, you know, we get to hold different values, and for some people, that's what makes it interesting. This is something that I've read in the paper. This term, Fort McTerrace, it was presented by a community member, and this is what she would value, is to have industrial activity here the way we see it in Fort McMurray. If you take a look at the top of this photo, that's a river. That's a river, not unlike some of the rivers around here. And hi, John. Come on in, take a seat. Well, we've exponentially increased our attendance, so that's excellent. So yeah, we have conflicting values in our community. So there are people that want to see a Fort McTerrace, and they will work hard to project that value into the future, to make that value become a reality. And so when I'm talking about this Youth on Water youth program, the values that you just discussed are an integral part of the Youth on Water program. So we're talking to young people about these values, and we're discussing with them how are their values going to be reflected in the future. So I'll just quickly tell you about myself. I grew up in Prince George. This is the Nechako River. So I grew up very close to the Nechako River, and I spent my summers swimming in the Nechako, endlessly. It was all I really wanted to do, was swim in the Nechako. And the reason that I kind of got pushed into conservation and being worried about salmon was because of my time spent in this river, where I would swim along. And I remember one summer where I swam through an eddy, and there were just suffering salmon in this eddy. And I really had no idea why the salmon were suffering. Well, it didn't take long for me to find out about how the Nechako is controlled. The flow of the Nechako is controlled by a dam. So does anybody know the name of the dam?
Kenny Dam?
It is the Kenny Dam, yes. So the Kenny Dam was built in the 50s, and they control the flow of water. And the reason they control the flow of water is to generate power, and if it's a low water year, well, they don't necessarily have to let out as much water as the salmon might find ideal. They just need to let out enough water for them to survive, really. And so the salmon don't always survive. So I sort of, it was my time spent in rivers that drove me to be concerned about the health of rivers, and I understood the industrial impact on rivers and how fragile they can be. And living in Prince George, just as you mentioned, it's impossible not to go down for a nice walk next to the river and see where the Nechako and the Fraser come together, right at that very point, that beautiful, powerful point. There's a mill, a refinery, a hydrogen peroxide plant. This is a point of industrial activity at a massive scale, right there where those two great rivers come together. And so the impact on the Fraser is undeniable. I'll take a look at that. So I was driven into social work as a result of my time spent outdoors in the wilderness with youth. I was doing youth care work in the wilderness, and I realized, social work is a great field where I can actually make an impact on young people's lives. And so it pushed me forward, and I spent a lot of time working in wild spaces with young people, and that moved me towards my master's thesis, which looked at a certain psychological phenomenon that was occurring amongst youth in wilderness settings. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about some of this literature that I looked at for my thesis. First, I'll look at wilderness therapy. So you probably have an idea of what wilderness therapy is. It would be any kind of outdoor program that gets kids out and about in wild places. So a real common one that we think of would be maybe Outward Bound. Right? That's a pretty common one. But there's all kinds of different models that have sprung up. So here we see one of the findings of some researchers. They took a look at some of the clinical conditions found on the DSM, I think it was axis 1, 2, and 4. And doing some research, they found that purposeful engagement with the wilderness assists in ameliorating certain psychological issues amongst youth. So I recognized that in my thesis, and these youth programs that I was working in, I saw that this is being outside with young people really works. It really does work. And there was a certain something that I noticed happening amongst young people while we were out in the wilderness. Looking through all the literature and trying to get a sense of what is it that I'm seeing, what we found is there's been a lot of literature, a lot of people have written and studied wilderness programs amongst youth. But when people do some meta-analysis, this Canadian researcher, Michael Unger, he said, yeah, people say, yes, it works. We see it works, and it's clinically proven to work. But why? What is it that's going on? Nobody really took a look at why does it work. And so my experience out in wild spaces with young people, I realized something exciting is going on. There is something spectacular happening for a lot of young people. Not all of the youth, but for a good number of them. So on day 5 of a wilderness canoe trip, you know, at the end of a day of paddling, when we settle in and we put the fires up and we start telling stories. Well, something incredible is happening. These youth, all of a sudden, something begins to change. And so I was trying to figure out, what is it that's changing? What is going on? And so I came across work by Abraham Maslow. So Maslow's pretty well known for his hierarchy of needs. He's a humanistic psychologist, probably one of the more famous psychologists often talked about. And so some of his last work was around the concept of peak experience. So what is peak experience? I'm talking about peak experiences happening in wild spaces, but Maslow said peak experiences don't have to happen in wild places. They can happen while listening to spectacular music, or looking at pieces of art, or all different kinds of stimuli can encourage the occurrence of a peak experience. So a peak experience is a very short-lived moment. It really is just a moment, but it's a moment of euphoria. You have a sense of wonder or awe, and it's almost like a transcendental moment. Probably for everybody here, you've spent time outside. You know that every once in a while there's this spectacular feeling of true connection. You're out and about, and you feel like, wow, I am part of this spectacular experience. There's a sense of wonder and awe. All of a sudden you have a sense of purpose. You feel connected. You have this notion of profound understanding. And another, I think I have it on the next slide. Okay, so Maslow goes on to say that these moments, albeit oftentimes very short and fleeting, they are moments of change. For a lot of young people, and I saw this happening, was young people this was their time to change the direction of their lives. A lot of the young people I was working with, they were, one program I worked in was like a rehabilitation camp. It was called Camp Trapping, just outside of Prince George and Hickson. And these young guys that came out there were criminals. They weren't bad guys, but they had exhibited bad behaviors. You know, they were. Some of them were pretty bad dudes. I'll just give you a quick example. So, for example, I remember one young guy. He had this incredible strut, like a gangster strut, if you can imagine. He just strutted around like a gangster all over the place. And you know, this was his guys. This was his tough guys that he put on to protect himself. And it worked because he appeared intimidating to the other young people, thanks to this walk. Well, I remember one day we went out and we were doing a really long snowshoe. And so we were probably doing a 10K loop. We were preparing to do an extended winter trip. And so we were just practicing snowshoeing, and so we were doing quite a long loop. And he was at the back, and he couldn't stand being at the back, because he had this gangster strut that just did not work with snowshoes. He could not make it work with snowshoes, but he tried. He tried for probably 3 kilometers, and the group left him. And then finally he just gave up his gangster strut and walked just as most efficiently as he could with his snowshoes on. And you know, I don't know if that was necessarily his moment, but that was a moment for him where he realized that, you know, this tough guys that he held was not efficient for him in the situation he was in. But more to the point of the peak experience, there were times on mountaintops during some incredible trips, multi-day trips where we would summit, not exceedingly high peaks, but we would summit mountains. And at the peaks, we would find this psychological phenomena was occurring amongst quite a few of the young people, where they couldn't believe what was going on. You know, oftentimes silence would fall over the group, and you could get a sense that they were overwhelmed by the moment. And my research, my thesis, looked at these moments, and so I had these young people that had gone through this program I was working in, which had been around for 30 years, and I interviewed men who, as youth, went through this, and I said, what was it? What happened? Do you remember the moment when you felt like something changed? And these were the stories I collected. It was stories about these moments on top of mountains, or on long canoe trips. These special moments, and they could all remember distinctly, and these were the stories I collected, distinct moments when they said, yep, that's when I realized my life was going to go a different direction. And so these were moments of profound change for these young. And obviously it doesn't happen for all the young people, but for the people in my study, they were definitely, their psychological health improved substantially. So I then, a year after my thesis work, I decided to focus on research around what were the people like me, the people facilitating these excursions, what was our experience? How were we seeing this moment that these young men were having? And so this paper that I wrote, it looked at those experiences of the care providers. And so then I had a whole nother set of stories, incredible accounts of these moments when youth care workers saw these young men change and saw these profound differences in men. I had stories of watching, I was told stories of young men breaking down and becoming vulnerable in front of their larger group of peers, and just how incredibly profound some of these moments for some of these men were. And the characteristics of this peak experience kept popping up in the stories of the youth care workers and in the stories of the youth. So oftentimes it's a very short-lived, 20, 30 seconds experience, but the overwhelming power of the moment was undeniable in both the stories of the young men who had gone through the program, but also of the youth care workers observing these young men. So one of the findings, one of the stories that was told me was the idea of setting the table. One of the youth care workers, he had been doing this for 20 years, he said, you know what? We cannot make this peak experience happen. This moment of change, there's nothing we can do to force somebody to have it. All we can do is we can provide all of the opportunities. We can put them in the right place, provide them with the right skills, make sure they have the right level of fitness, provide the right level of risk. Oftentimes there's some degree of risk associated with this. It doesn't necessarily have to be actual risk, but maybe a perceived risk and some level of exertion. So there's some challenge involved in getting to this place. And when all of these conditions are right, some of these young people exhibit the characteristics of having peak experiences as described by Maslow. And so one of the respondents, he called it setting the table. And so that setting of the table, that is where this notion of YOW comes in. So YOW is youth on water, and really what it is, it's setting the table for young people to have these moments of experience. Yeah.
Could you just tell the age groups, what is it from, when you say youth, is it 12 to 19 or is it?
Yeah, for my thesis, they were 14 to 18. And for YOW, we usually go 14 to 19. So YOW is a river-based experiential program. And we talked earlier about values and projecting our values into the future. So it's multifaceted. What we're trying to do with YOW is we're trying to get young people out onto the water, get them out onto the rivers, give them the opportunity to experience the Skeena, to experience the copper, to experience the Bulkley, the Telkwa, the Kispiox, to get right into these rivers. I mean, like right in and swimming in this water. So how did this this idea for getting young people out on water spring up? Well, part of it came from this work I'd been doing in outdoor, outdoor social work. But in 2008, just by pure fluke, by a total accident, I ended up going on a 16-day kayak trip. This was our trip from the Sacred Headwaters, the start of the Skeena, all the way down to Hazelton. And I don't know if you can see it, but right here, this is me and this is my friend Trevor. And he's got his hand up, he's gonna high-five me. And if you look at the scene, you can see why we're high-fiving there, because it was just the most spectacular moment. I think we were probably right there at that moment. We had our camp set up, we had arrived right there at Courier Creek by rafts and by kayak. This is the Skeena here. You can see how tiny it is still. Just the most incredible moment. So perhaps at that very moment, all of us in our group were having a peak experience. It was absolutely incredible. And during that trip, I thought, how can I share this with young people? And I was living in Hazelton at the time, and the young people in Hazelton, if you know Hazelton, you know that they have incredibly high rates of unemployment, sexual and alcohol abuse in families. They have shockingly high. Morristown, Hazelton have some of the highest rates of youth suicide, teen suicide in Canada per capita. And I struggled with that notion because in my mind, I was in Hazelton because I was living there because it was so beautiful and so powerful and such a gorgeous place. Big rivers, big mountains. I was out and about all the time. Actually, I went to Hazelton because I thought, oh, this would be a great place so I can finish up my thesis and I'll have no distractions. Yeah, right. I look out my window every morning and I see giant mountains out there just waiting for me to head up them. So, the thesis took a little longer than I thought. But, yeah, this getting out there, like I was saying, I had a hard time matching the what I saw as Hazelton with the reality of life for a lot of the young people who were living there in the First Nations communities. And so while we were on this trip, I thought I'm going to set the table for some of the young people in Hazelton. And that was the vision initially, was just for Hazelton. How can I provide this service to young people in Hazelton so they can see this? So they can experience these rivers that are in their territories, in their backyard. After coming back from this trip, there was an open house. Royal Dutch Shell was proposing to extract coal bed methane from the Sacred Headwaters, and they had an open house right near my place. And I saw a bunch of these, enviro hippies that I'd sort of gotten to know sort of in a cursory way on this trip. And they had a little protest outside the Shell open house. And I went into the Shell open house and I looked around, and what did I see? But I saw them focusing on youth engagement. So Shell was very proud to tell us that they were providing school buses for dry grad. They were assisting young people with getting to their hockey tournaments. They were providing money for young people to be young people and to enjoy life in all of the communities that were going to be impacted by the loss of water quality. That really struck me. I thought, why would Shell care about this? And I realized Shell is projecting their values into the future. And I went back to my own childhood, and I thought about my own childhood in Prince George. And I thought, well, I played hockey when I was a kid in Prince George. And I remember one of the things I was most proud of was a medal I had gotten from hockey. And it was an ESSO medal. ESSO was a huge sponsor of youth hockey. And I remember thinking how much I really liked ESSO. I really liked ESSO. Was so cool. And so Esso had been doing a good job of projecting their values into the future through me. So I saw that at this Royal Dutch Shell open house, where Shell was attempting to provide a really good feeling around their company to these young people. Because they know, I mean, you and I, we all know that these companies have 20, 30, 50-year plans. This short, they don't deal in like 3-year plans like a lot of environmental groups that I know do. They're looking 20, 30 years down the road. So it makes sense to them to invest in communities through young people. And so what I saw when I got to know those very strong environmentalists in Hazelton was a lot of them were getting tired. They were getting tired because they were fighting giant companies. They were endlessly going at huge multinational companies. And this idea of compassion fatigue really was getting to them. And I thought, this is intense. So Shell is building this relationship with young people in our watershed, and we have people that are trying to maintain amazing water quality and salmon stocks, and they are burning out. They're not going to be around forever. So we're going to set the table with this YOW program. We're going to provide an opportunity for young people to have healthy recreation, to get out on the water, to experience it. But the whole time, we're going to be talking to them about the values that we hold. We're going to talk to them about the importance of salmon to our culture. We're going to talk to them about the importance of clean water. We're going to talk to them about how it's not just us that rely on good, viable salmon stocks. It's every element of the wild. So we've got research has shown that salmon DNA can be found in trees close to, on the riverbanks. Well, what does that mean? The trees rely on the salmon? Sure they do. The bears rely on the salmon. Salmon are a keystone species, and we know that. And Royal Dutch Shell's plan to extract coal bed methane from the sacred headwaters threatens our entire watershed. There are, obviously, we all know of many other threats right now that are going on in our watershed. But at the time, this was the one that I was most concerned with, was the Royal Dutch Shell threat to the sacred headwaters. This picture here is actually one of the fun games we play. This is a YOW outing. So this is we just call this the rodeo, where you hang on to the stern line, and you try and stay balanced for as long as you can, and we spin the raft in circles until you fall off. So, like I said, the idea behind YOW is we want to build leaders that share our values. And when we have young people in the water, I would say 80% of the young people that are on these YOW trips, so I'll just tell you quickly, YOW runs in Houston, Smithers, Morristown, Hazelton, Gitsigupla, Gitwanga, Terrace. So these are the places that we run YOW now. And so YOW has run for 5 years, and in each town we usually run a session with up to 20 kids. So 20 kids in each of these communities. What we're doing is we're allowing sometimes up to 100 kids per year or more, oftentimes, to get right into these waters. They jump right in the Skeena. They jump right into the Kispiogs. They jump right in the Bulkley. They are swimming. They are totally immersed in the water. Are they having peak experiences? I hope so. Are they more psychologically healthy as a result of this experience? I sure hope so. Another program that I conceived of a few years after was WOW, and this is Women on Water. And what I noticed with YOW was there's something about being on rafts, and there's this sort of machismo that comes out, and oftentimes the young women on the trips would take a back seat to the young men. And the young men would be on the oars and moving the raft around, and it wasn't really a conducive opportunity for young women. And so what I thought was, I know, this is my friend Allie. She swam the entire length of the Skeena River on a trip that we did from the sacred headwaters right down to the ocean. That took us almost a month, and she swam, the length of the river is over 700 kilometers, but I'm guessing she probably swam double that because she swam back and forth across the river so many times, which is pretty amazing. But Allie's just one good example of women in our region who are leaders in the environmental community. We have, when we take a look at who blocked the roads to the sacred headwaters when industry wanted to come in, it was matriarchs. Who, when I take a look at the heads of some of these environmental organizations that are making a real difference in our communities, it's women. And so I thought, well, nothing better than to provide a safe place for young women to make this very same connection, and to have a program that they could call their own, to be empowered. And so really, all I did for Women on Water, because I wanted it to be a female-driven program, was I simply said to a couple of friends of mine, one being Kim Hoekstra, she's here at UNBC, and another one being Morgan Baldwin, who works here. I said, hey, what do you think of this idea of a program where it's all female participants, and the guides are females, and the bus driver is a woman, and everything around this program is run by women. Do you think that's a good idea? They thought it was a good idea. And so all I did was I forced our parent agency, Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition. I sort of gave a firm handshake and said, we'd like some of the money that is going towards YOW to move into this WOW program. And that was the extent of because I felt like it was important that it be a completely female program driven from the top down. I just sort of started the rock rolling down the hill and then just stepped away from it. And so my role in WOW, and I think it's an incredible program, is just simply from the genesis point of it, and then I just left it there. I'd like to quickly tell you about this river here. If you recognize this is the Bulkley River. We're kind of looking back at Smithers a little bit. This is Wet'suwet'en territory. You can see a couple rafts in the background. Those rafts are full of Wet'suwet'en youth from Morristown. Morristown, like Hazelton, suffers from incredibly high rates of youth suicide. Some of the conditions in Morristown are deplorable. The opportunities for recreation are slim to none. Things are really looking up for young people in Hazelton right now, and I was just really glad that one element of the movement towards health in that community could be providing some activity on the river for young people in Morristown. The young people in Morristown, they have a hard time getting on the rivers because if you know the Bulkley at all, from Morristown to Hazelton is an incredibly complex bit of water. You have class 4 rapids, you have incredibly steep canyons, you have something called the Bulkley Gates, where the entire Bulkley River runs between two giant cliff walls no wider than these walls here in this room. So you can imagine the entire flow of the Bulkley through a tiny little space called the Bulkley Gates. Very hard to access. And so the young people from Morristown, how would they have ever gotten to know their own territory? This is the territory that they are going to be in charge of in 10, 15, 20 years. They are going to be the ones making decisions around who comes into the watershed, who extracts resources, who puts a pipeline across the river, who tunnels under the river. They are going to be making these decisions in 15 or 20 years. And so I thought with YOW, let's allow young people the opportunity to connect with these waterways in their territories. And so this is This is them moving through. So right here, we are on an island in the middle of the Bulkley. These young people here, they're from Morristown. This island can only be accessed by water. It's just a really cool island that you could imagine having a fort on or having a little hideout. And so there's a little back channel. We practiced swimming. We practiced river skills like throw bagging, rescue skills. We practiced all kinds of different scenarios, not only to get them in the water, but to give them some sense of confidence around the river, some degree of safety and security. So when they do decide to head out on the water, they know, I'm not going out on the Bulkley without a PFD. I'm not going out without a helmet. These are things that are instilled in them now. This young woman here on the right, she's become a very powerful voice in her community. She is taking the values that maybe were discussed in YOW, the values around clean water, salmon, the importance of providing, ensuring that we have a viable ecosystem in the future. She's taking those out and she's talking about conservation at every opportunity. She's becoming a leader in her community around conservation. And this is really exciting because she shares my values around rivers. And she will be teaching her children these same values. So this is the sacred headwaters. This is one of the wells that Shell was able to sneak in and drill before anybody knew what was going on. I mean, I think the condition of the sign speaks to how much they really care about their system there. I wanted to talk a bit about, yes, okay. So, the plans of industry. Well, like I mentioned, the whole idea of YOW is not only to provide young people with an opportunity to have a life-changing moment, but it's a way for all of us who live here to project our values into the future. When I look at the plans of industry, I see, yeah, well, we've got 5+ pipeline projects planned for our region. In 15 years, will it just be LNG going through those pipelines? Because we're seeing these gas pipelines being used for oil. It's possible. Is that what's going to happen? Or if we look even further down the road, 40, 50 years, if we were just to, as much as I understand that the use of oil and hydrocarbons can't be sustained, we have to assume that companies like Esso, Shell, CNOOC, all these companies recognize that too. Well, certainly you can carry water through these pipes easily. And what we know is that in the next 50 years, I mean, if you look in the CIA fact book, they're suggesting that in 40+ years, we're going to see water being more valuable than oil. So perhaps that's part of the plan. Let's just pipe out water, send it around the world. That's one thing we also have in abundance. So in 50 years, I just want you to think of where you're going to be. I know where I'm going to be in 50 years. 6 feet under, probably. But how am I going to project my values? Even though I'm not here, I want to know that there are children who can go out and catch salmon, that the grizzlies are still able to catch salmon on the Babine, drag them into the forest, and feed the myriad creatures in trees. So here we have the sacred headwaters again. I just want to remind you of all the things that I've just talked about. And really my message is that there are opportunities for each of us to project our values into the future. This is just one way to do it. And that is just by getting youth out and sharing our values around rivers and around our watershed. thank you for your time.
I'm sure we'll entertain some questions there, Chris.
Okay.
I'll start off.
Okay, sure.
I've been leaving little prayers on slips of paper in the tops of mountaintop cairns for probably 30 years or more that,
Awesome.
that say, may there always be wilderness.
Yeah.
But I would also extend the concept of peak experiences to a number of other things,
Okay.
like being part of a rally,
Yeah.
going to the National Art Gallery and seeing a famous painting,
Yes.
walking the streets of some old European city. So
For sure.
I think the common denominator amongst all of those things and the wilderness experience you're talking about is really non-materialistic values.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the wilderness value is a subset of some larger set, right? So,
Absolutely.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are, as to extending your program to dealing with, the onslaught of the consumer industrial society in general,
Hmm.
as opposed to just industrial proposals to northwestern BC.
That is a huge question, and I guess what I have to say is my experience with young people is that if I were to say to young people, hey, come on, let's go on this amazing river and go down these class 4 rapids, and halfway through this class 4 rapid and the next one, you're going to jump in the river and you're going to swim around. That is actually probably easier for me to convince a young person to jump in the water in between class 4 rapids and swim around than it would be for me to convince them to think twice about getting the newest iPod. And that is absolutely a huge struggle, and I think that would be great to be able to move the concepts of YOW into that realm, but I don't feel like I have the skills or knowledge to do that.
No, I just see the potential as
Absolutely.
being, greater than even your successes here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the benefits of peak experience, as suggested by Maslow, is that there are a couple things. One, that after a peak experience, an individual is less concerned with material possessions than they were previously. And also around friendships, after a peak experience, an individual is less concerned with having a broad swath of friends, but is more concerned with the value of tight friendships, 2 or 3 friendships rather than 20 acquaintances. And that's what people begin to value, and that's one of the results of peak experiences, is that change in understanding around materialism and also the way people view friendships.
Yeah, I was wondering, Chris, about this. Does it matter to peak experience whether you're actually having this in a group or as a singular person? For example, an endorphin high when you go on a run. You can do this by yourself, but when you run in a group of people, you're in a race. It really heightens the whole experience even more, even though you think it's not possible.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is it actually necessary for them to go out with, let's say, 20 people or 10, however many you take out? Or can they then, are you giving them the tools to find the peak experiences on their own, by themselves, whenever they need them in tough times or whenever they're facing some challenges? Can that be taught in a way, do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, going back to the idea of setting the table, perhaps just by their understanding of how they came about with this feeling, oh, what was going on around me? Oh yeah, I was on the side of the river. Oh, we had just swam through this exciting piece of water. Maybe that can lead to it. But I've never really overtly discussed the idea of peak experience with young people while we've been doing these trips. And I don't know if it's something that I should or shouldn't do. It's just something we never really talked about, because it's, while I was doing my thesis proposal, I came across 2 distinct attitudes around the idea of peak experience. One of the attitudes was, well, yeah, why? Of course this can happen. Why would you think It almost is like ridiculous that you would be mentioning this. And then the other attitude, and one I got from the research, one of the members of the research ethics board was, what is this hocus pocus flaky stuff you're talking about? Or what? I don't even, what is this? You know, and he didn't even want to entertain the notion that there
I know
could
who
be
that
something.
was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering in terms of funding, what is the future? What is the financial future of this program? Looks like it costs a few dollars to run.
Yeah, it does cost a few dollars to run. So we have private, we have a philanthropist from the United States who pays for part of this. And we also have funding through a number of funding agencies like Tides Canada, Patagonia, MEC. So we have a broad range of funding, and you know, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you know, maybe we have some funding problems in the near future, as no doubt Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition will be audited in no time here.
With that, why don't we draw the event to a close?
Okay.
Thank Chris again, and we have a small token of our appreciation. I don't know if you have many UNBC mugs, but this one comes with
Thank you.
instant hot chocolate. as
Awesome.
well.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much.
Hey, we have some more questions?
Yeah, great.
Go ahead. We have a guest here that I should move on to our next meeting. And if you want to join us. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, this is the person that got stuck at the Smithers Airport. Hi, Tom.
And I grew up in an absolute industrial city.
Yeah.
Yes, and I knew from television they were much nicer.